IDP IELTS in Australia. It's exciting to have so many test takers join us today on Zoom and Facebook. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to connect with us. Today, we welcome back IELTS expert Don Oliver. In today's webinar, IELTS Writing Task 1 and how it's marked, Don will assess and analyze the IELTS marking criteria. Expect another amazing presentation today as Don will be sharing lots of great tips and advice. As always, we will end the webinar with a short Q&A session. So if you have any questions specifically about writing task 1, please submit it in the Q&A and comments box, and we will try to answer as many as we can today. The Facebook recording will be available right after this session. So if you by any chance miss some important points, worry not, as you can catch back on anything you learned today. Okay, it's time to kick off this insightful webinar. Welcome back, Don. It's been a while. So good to see you again.
It's great to see you too, KD. And I'm very happy to be sharing with everybody today some important information about Task 1. Now, Task 1 is 1/3 of the mark in your writing in IELTS, but many people find it's very difficult. And there are reasons for that, and we'll go into those reasons in some detail. A special thing that we will do today is that we will look at 2 actual essays by real test takers, and one of them is a band 9 and one of them is a band 6.5, and I'll try and explain to you why one is a 9 and why the other is a 6.5. We're going to look at academic and general training, Task 1, and especially focus on the first assessment criterion, and that one is task achievement. So in writing, you need to actually answer the question fully. You don't have to do that in speaking, but in writing, that is important. We'll analyze the other assessment criteria, the coherence and cohesion, the lexical resource, and the grammatical range and accuracy. And as I said, we'll look at some real examples and I'll give you some feedback on those. So let's begin by looking at the academic writing task 1. So as I said, it's important to analyze the task so that you can answer the question fully. This is the first assessment criterion. And just to remind you, there are 4 assessment criteria, and each one is 25% of the mark. So here, for task achievement, if you don't answer the question fully, you will probably get a low score, and your other scores may be quite high. This often happens for test takers who fail to read the question carefully enough. So in the academic task 1, you are always asked to do exactly the same thing. You people who have done the IELTS writing test before will know the answer to this. What are you always asked to do in an academic task 1? You are always told to summarize the information. That means you don't give all the information. You give the main features. You select the important parts of that information and you compare the parts, one with the other. In most task 1 academic tasks, you will have 2 pieces of information. And here you will compare what is happening in each of those. Okay, there are some questions you should ask yourself about task 1. When you go into the test, do this. Ask yourself, what patterns am I seeing in this pair of graphs, in this table of figures, in this diagram, in these maps? Because in an academic task 1, you might be asked to look at any of those things. There will always be a pattern. The numbers may be going up or going down. Some may be very big and others may be quite small. Ask yourself, is there an exception to this pattern? Where everything else is going up, maybe at one point it goes down. Think about exceptions and patterns, and then you will start to understand what you are looking at. Think about time elements. If it's a line graph, a column chart, the horizontal axis will indicate a time. It could be seconds, it could be minutes, weeks, months, years, centuries. Ask yourself, how many things am I comparing here? Is it just two things? Is it maybe the behavior of men and women? But doing what? Is it their hobbies? Is it the time they spend working, for example? And think about the number values. It may be millions. It may be percent. It may be square miles. Think about those things and you will begin to understand the graph or the diagram more fully. Okay, let's look at a table of figures. And this is a very interesting one. This is a typical academic task 1. And as with all task 1s, you are told what you are looking at. And here we are looking at statistics for the world's 6 largest countries in 2012. So you can see those countries there on the left: Russia, Canada, the USA, China, Brazil, and Australia. And we're comparing over 3 different criteria. Remember what I said before? What are the patterns? Can you see any patterns here? Do you see that middle column? It says arable land. Oh, is this a new word? It doesn't matter. It's explained to you at the bottom. Arable land is land that can be used for food production. You'll notice that Canada has the least arable land and Australia has the second least. And you'll notice that the populations of those 2 countries are the smallest. Is this a pattern? Let's look at some of the patterns. The area, the actual size of the country, seems not to influence population size. China is only the 4th largest, but it has by far the biggest population. But arable land seems to be important for how many people you can have. An important factor there, you can see that the USA and China have exactly the same area, the same number of square kilometers, but very different populations. There are exceptions. There are exceptions not so much in that trend about arable land, but you'll see that some countries, some big countries, have very small populations. Canada is the 2nd biggest country in the world, and its population is very, very small compared to the other countries. This is one way of trying to understand the task. Remember, the task is to describe this information. There is a time element. What is it? It's just 1, 2012. So what tense would you be using if you wrote this essay? Well, you could use the present tense, because we can use the present tense to describe something that is always true. But if we say in 2012, then you would naturally use the past tense. In 2012, there were 32 million people in Canada. When we compare, we will be looking at 6 countries and we will be comparing them with the 3 variables that we mentioned. The number values, of course, are obvious. They are those number values we mentioned. Square kilometers by million, the percentage of arable land, and the millions of population. By the way, if you are looking at something like 1,000 million, as in the case of China, you could say that 1,000 million or 1 billion. Be careful of that because it's important that you don't say, oh, there are 1,300 people in China. Of course, that is completely wrong. Being accurate in the information you give is an important part of task achievement. What are the other criteria though? Well, the other criteria, as you know, are coherence and cohesion, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy. But before we leave task achievement, let me remind you, an important part of getting a good score in that first criterion is to give an overview. That means to sum up the main features in 1 or 2 sentences. We're going to look at an overview which frankly could be improved in a minute. Coherence and cohesion is about using paragraphs correctly. The essay we look at has 4 paragraphs, but it's also a matter of using good linking words. Words like so, but, as, because, after that, of course, if, then, obviously, first, secondly. These are important words. Some of them are conjunctions, some of them are adverbs. The examiner is looking for these words when he or she is giving you a score for coherence and cohesion. Lexical resource in writing is all about spelling, using words that are appropriate, natural words, and also showing that you can use some uncommon words. Not a lot of uncommon words, but some. Spelling is very important. And we will look at an essay that only gets a band. Actually, we'll look at the essay that we are going to look at actually gets quite a good score for lexical resource, and I'll show you why in a moment. And finally, grammatical range and accuracy. It is using accurate grammar, but it's also using a range of grammar, short sentences and longer sentences. And we'll see examples of that too. Okay, coherence and cohesion. Remember, it's about using paragraphs, but it's also about using words that link ideas. Here are the public version of the assessment criteria. And you'll see that the second column is coherence and cohesion. Look at this column carefully. Download these assessment criteria and study them. See where you are and where you need to go to improve your score. If we look at coherence and cohesion there at band 7, it says uses a range of cohesive devices appropriately. There may be some mistakes. Maybe they will rely too much on a particular word, but there is a range. If you look at band 8, here paragraphing is sufficient and appropriate. That's also for band 7 as well. So what sort of linking words are we thinking about if we look at a task like this table? Well, we're comparing things, aren't we? So we would use words like in contrast. Canada has a very large area, but in contrast to China, it has a very small population. Much the same. The size of the USA, China, and Canada is much the same. Whereas, however, similarly, surprisingly, words like this tell the reader that here is something that is maybe not expected. You're telling the reader to look carefully at this. This is what a cohesive device does. It helps the reader understand what they are reading. On the other hand, we all know that phrase. It's a good phrase. What about this? Now, this is a different sort of task entirely. This is a diagram. And this diagram is about how to plant a mature tree in your garden. And here you can see that it's a very different sort of task. You don't have numbers. You don't have trends. So don't write an essay talking about something is increasing or something is decreasing or something is compared to something else. Here you have to say, first you do this, then you do that, next you do that in order to achieve something. What sort of words do we naturally use? Well, I've used one first, then, next, in order to, those ropes, for example, that are holding the tree in order to keep the tree vertical. So that is another way of saying in order to. After that, finally. These sorts of words are what you might use for a process such as that. The next criterion, as we know, is lexical resource. It just means the words that you use, your vocabulary. And again, if you look at the assessment criteria that you can download from IELTS.com, you'll see that Band 7, you will have some errors, some spelling errors, maybe a bad choice of word. It's not exactly the right word. At Band 6, of course, there will be many more errors. At Band 8, you will have very few errors and you will use more uncommon words, and those words will show that you are using English in a very natural and expert way. The essay that we're going to look at scores a 9 for their lexical resource. The wide range of vocabulary flexibly used means that you have more than one word for the same thing. You are flexible. Okay, here is an example of a pie chart. There's no information on this pie chart. I'm using this just to show you the sorts of words, the lexis, the vocabulary that applies to a task such as this. The words that are naturally used here would be words like proportion, words like percentage, words like the majority, words like more than 2/3 of, less than a quarter of. This is showing the examiner that you have the vocabulary to describe that sort of task. What about this one? This is a line graph. And again, there's no information here. But let's look at the words that you would use for any line graph. You would use words like a dramatic fall, a steady rise, a significant decline. Do you see here that we're using the right adjective with the right noun? This is called collocation. When two words go together naturally and effectively, that means you are showing the examiner that you can use English in an expert way. Those lines at the bottom show little change. Finally, looking at grammatical range and accuracy, you'll see here that there are some important things to remember. For grammar, at the band 7 stage, you have to show that you have a good control of grammar and punctuation. You can make a few mistakes, but not too many. At band 8, you make very few mistakes, and you also show that you have a wide range of structures. What does that mean? Well, think about longer sentences that you make. Very often they will have a relative clause using a word like which, or that, or who, or whose, or where. This is a place where you can find lots of things that help you. Now that's a long sentence. It has 2 relative clauses in it. A sentence that has an if in it will be a complex sentence. If the government did that, then something else would happen, because you don't have to make your sentences too long. Make sure that you are comfortable making 2 or 3 complex sentences accurately. And if you can do that, that's enough to show the examiner that you are a band 7 or better. Okay, what do test takers sometimes forget to do? They sometimes forget to look at the graph or the diagram or the maps or the chart and understand it. They forget to plan their essay by asking themselves, what are the patterns? What are the exceptions? What is the time that we're talking about? What are the quantities? Sometimes they forget to rephrase the words from the task. You should rephrase the words. You don't have to rephrase it very much. In fact, we're going to look at an essay that rephrases it very little, but they do cleverly change the word order a bit. Sometimes there are key features that the test taker forgets to mention. If we go back to that table of the 6 largest countries in the world, it's very important to mention that China has by far the biggest population. That is an important thing. It's important to mention that Russia is by far the largest country in area. Those are important features. Sometimes people forget the overview, and that is the general statement which compares things. We're going to look at an essay which talks about a process, and this overview is difficult to produce because we're not talking about trends or key facts or something that comparisons of figures, but we're talking about something that is static, that illustrates a process, and we'll look at that in a minute. Sometimes people forget to use numbers, data. Make sure that you use the numbers to support your description. And sometimes people don't write enough words. There's another thing that some people forget. They write too many words. Don't write too many words. You won't be penalized, but if you write too many words, you will run out of time and you will lose focus. I suggest about 160 or 170 words is good for a task 1. Sometimes people forget to use paragraphs, or the paragraphing is not clear. And I'll show you an example of this in a moment. And finally, sometimes test takers forget to check their work. And this is a mistake because 2 minutes of checking can probably get rid of 5 or 6 spelling or grammar errors, and that will improve your score. Okay, so we're going to look at an essay, a band 9 essay that answers this task. Now, can you all see that task? This is in the material that you can download from IELTS.com. And this is a process, how to make bricks. Not just how to make bricks, but the process of creating bricks in order to supply them to the building industry. Always you are told what you are looking at. And here it says, the diagram below shows the process by which bricks are manufactured for the building industry. There are 7 steps here. Digging up the clay, refining the clay, adding some sand and water, and then forming the bricks, firing the bricks. Firing is a word for cooking when it comes to bricks, drying them, packaging them, and then delivering them. Let's look at this essay, which is a band 9. Now, this is a real essay. A real test taker did this essay. And you'll see that in the first sentence, he or she does not really change the wording very much. And this is the overview. The first sentence is the overview in this essay. Now, you have probably been told to produce an overview, a summary, in the conclusion. Well, that's okay too. It doesn't matter where you put your overview. It could be at the start, like this. It could be at the end, or it could even be in the middle. It's probably more logical to do it either at the start or at the end. Here, the process by which bricks are manufactured for the building industry can be outlined in 7 consecutive steps. A process overview will say how many steps there are. This one says there are 7 and that they are consecutive. It gives some information about that. And then it uses 4 paragraphs to describe each of those steps in some detail. This is a good essay. As I said, it gets a 9 for task achievement, a 9 for its coherence and cohesion, a 9 for its lexical resource, and also a 9 for its grammatical range and accuracy. It leaves none of the key features out, and it has very good choice of words, not always perfect, and very good grammar, which is perfect. Okay, the examiner, in fact, not just one examiner, but a group of examiners decided that this response fully satisfied the requirements of the task. And it does. The overview is not perfect. The overview could be improved, but nonetheless, it's sufficient to get a band 9 for task achievement. The message is very easy to read, but I would suggest that the paragraphing needs to be a little bit clearer. Now, it's clear that the paragraphing is there, but do you see here? It's not absolutely clear where one paragraph ends and the next one begins. I would recommend that if you want to make it perfectly clear, you should leave a space between paragraphs. And finally, the grammar and the vocabulary is used very well with no spelling mistakes and no grammatical mistakes. That's a 9. Okay, we've looked at academic task 1, and now we're going to look at general training task 1, because I know a lot of you are very interested in the general training. General training is often used for migration purposes, for immigration, for showing an employer your level of English. So let's look at task achievement for general training task 1. Now with academic task 1, task achievement is all about summarizing the key features and using numbers to support it. But because the task in general training is very different, there are different criteria for assessing task achievement. In a general training task 1, you are always told the same things. You are always given the situation. It might be you have had some problems at the cinema, or maybe the local council is asking for your opinion or people's opinion about something. You are always told who you are writing to. You are writing either to a friend or to someone you do not know. In other words, it's an informal letter to a friend or a formal letter to someone you do not know. You are always told to cover 3 or sometimes 4 points. This is extremely important. If you forget to cover one of those points, you will get a very low score for your task achieved. And you are always told how to begin. If it's dear ... then this is simply a letter to a friend, and you can use informal language. But if it's dear sir or madam, then that is a formal letter, and you must use formal language. We'll talk about that in a moment. So you need to understand what the task is, what the situation is. I have seen some people who have written letters and the whole letter was irrelevant because that first step was not carefully made. They didn't understand what the situation was about. This is extremely important. Understand what you are being asked to describe. Make sure that you cover those 3 or 4 points equally. Make sure that you maintain the appropriate tone. Is it a letter to your friend or is it a letter to a stranger? Is it an informal letter or is it a formal letter? Let's look at the other assessment criteria. I've already talked about the task achievement, but now the coherence and cohesion, the lexical resource, and the grammatical range and accuracy are exactly the same as for the academic task 1. All those things that we said about academic task 1 are the same for general training task 1. The lexical resource, of course, will change a little depending on if you are writing a formal or an informal letter. And I'll give you an example of that soon. So here is an example of an informal task. You are asked to organize a farewell dinner for a colleague at work, and you want to ask the manager of your colleague's department to give a speech at the dinner. Now, I'm not sure what your work is like, how formal it is, but in most of the English-speaking world, in Australia, in the United States, in the UK, in New Zealand, Canada, the relationship between a worker and a manager is quite relaxed and pretty informal. you would use first names, for example, when talking to each other. So here, this is an informal letter. You're asked to do 3 things. Give details of the dinner, say why you think the manager should speak at the dinner, and suggest some of the things that he might speak about. Now, this is important to understand the situation and to understand the tone that you should use. And here are some examples of the sorts of words that you might use. I wanted to let you know that John is retiring. This is a quick note to invite you to speak at the dinner. I was wondering if you would like to say something about. Would you mind doing this? All of these are informal ways of speaking. Why are they informal ways of speaking? They just are. I can't explain that very much. There is a formal style in English, and there is this normal, casual style that we use every day. These are informal phrases. Do you think you could? Is again fairly informal. But then we get on to some other ways of expressing our meaning, which are a little more formal. I hope to hear from you soon. I'm looking forward to. Those sorts of things are a little bit more formal. Informal phrases that you might use in the middle of your letter, and so forth. You'll be surprised to know. By the way, how do you feel about it? Since we're on the topic. However, I'm pretty sure that you'll like to speak, of course. Again, these are normal conversational phrases that you would use in a letter to someone you know quite well. You might use one of those adverbs that we talked about earlier on. Surprisingly, no one has offered to speak at this dinner. On the other hand, if you don't want to speak, could you recommend someone else? Let's look at another task, and here this is a formal letter. Now, formal letters will be to someone you don't know, and here the person you are writing to is the manager of a cinema. And so, because you don't know this person, you are asked to begin the letter, dear sir or madam. Again, you are always told the situation. You had problems, not one problem, but some problems, maybe 2, maybe 3, with the staff at the cinema. And you are asked to say when you were there, and you're asked to give details of the problems with an S. This is important. If you just say one problem, that is not answering the question. And then say what you want the manager to do. This is a typical task. And for a formal letter, you might say, I'm writing to inform you that. I would be happy to. I would be grateful if. In response to your. I am writing to inquire about. Do you sense here that these are not the sorts of words you would use with a friend? These are the sorts of words you would use with a stranger. They are formal words. Some of them you might use with a friend as well. I look forward to hearing from you. But always an informal letter will finish yours faithfully. That is how you end a letter to someone you do not know personally. Okay, the sorts of formal phrases you might use in the middle of this letter. In addition, I am dismayed to find. Also, it appears that. You hear that this language is not very direct. This is formal language. I await your response. Apart from this, however, I'm confident that, of course, etc. These are the sorts of words that you might use with someone you don't know. Surprisingly, again, that's another word that we've used before, but you could use that effectively in many situations. All right, we're going to look at an example now, and this is a band 6.5 from a real test taker. And this person has written his or her letter in response to this task. Again, spend some time understanding the situation. The public library wants to make improvements. They want ideas from the public. You're writing to the librarian. In other words, it's a formal letter. You don't know this person. Do these three things. Describe what you like, say what you don't like, and then make suggestions, plural. Not one suggestion, two or more suggestions. This is important. So here, let's look at this essay that gets a 7 for task achievement. In other words, the tone is good, is appropriate. It covers all those points. The coherence and cohesion is not so good. Maybe the paragraphing is not so good, or the coherence is affected by its use of pronouns. Lexical resource is good, it's a band 7, but the grammar is weak. And this is what the essay, the letter looks like. Here, this person is clearly going through those points quite systematically and gets a 7 for task achievement. But let's look at the grammar here. This is in reference to your inquiry regarding the suggestions to library I would like give. The grammar here is clearly not very good, like to give. My opinion, or an opinion. I visited, really this is the wrong tense. I have visited the library many times. I have found facilities, and one problem? No, many problems. Plurals. A library must consist of substantial amount, a substantial amount. This, if I was teaching this person, I would tell them, be careful about articles, a and the. Be careful about tenses. These material, be careful about plurals. This is these materials. Should be placed and organized. The passive is necessary here. Can be, here, the passive is used, but it's wrongly used. The people can benefit, not be benefited. In the same time, at the same time. So here, this person has a few things they need to fix up. They need to fix up tenses, they need to fix up prepositions, they need to fix up articles, they need to understand the active and passive and plurals, 5 things. They fix up those 5 things and they will get a very good score for grammar. Let's look at the lexical resource now as we go on, and you'll see the lexical resource, the vocabulary, is strong. It's a band 7. One spelling mistake, that is 1 word nowadays, not 3 words. Another spelling mistake. You should fix the problem, not relax the problem. It's not a spelling mistake, it's the wrong choice of word. Indulge is a spelling mistake. This person has forgotten the E on the end. But 3 mistakes in vocabulary, in spelling or word choice is not much. And that's why it's a band 7 for that criterion. So we're nearly finished now, and I'm just trying to remind you that the sorts of mistakes that people make in general training are very similar in some ways to the academic task 1. Take a few minutes to analyze the task and plan your letter in general training or your essay in academic task 1. Rephrase the words that you find in the task. Cover all the points equally. Use an appropriate tone. Is it formal or is it informal? Write at least 150 words and use paragraphs, full paragraphs. Don't use headings or subheadings. Don't use bullet points. And finally, make sure that you check your work at the end. If you do all of those things, you will find that you will succeed in your task 1 writing, academic or general training. Look at the assessment criteria, look at our practice materials on our website, and you are on the way to nailing task 1. Also, there are many other resources for you, and there are some of them. I would recommend going to our Facebook page and looking at the questions and the answers that are there. Also TikTok and all sorts of other things like support videos. Check them out. Okay. On July the 15th, there is another webinar which will be very interesting about task 2. So tune in for that as well. Well, Kavita, I have finished my presentation, and now I'm very much looking forward to answering some questions.
Thanks, Don. So many amazing tips, and we have received many questions, so I hope we can get through many of them as possible. Okay, let's get started. So the first question is, what's the best way to paraphrase data in a diagram?
Well, in a diagram, there is usually a lot of vocabulary given to you. There are labels, and also you are always told what you are looking at. For example, in the case that we saw, this diagram shows the process for brick manufacturing for the building industry. How do you paraphrase that? Well, in the example we saw, there wasn't much paraphrasing, but the order of the sentence was changed. But think about words that you can use. Instead of saying brick manufacturing, how to manufacture bricks. In other words, instead of using a noun, use a verb. Manipulate the form of the word and think of synonyms to express the same meaning. This is something you can practice, of course, and it's something that would be very useful if you practiced it and showed it to a native speaker and said, well, is this a good paraphrase?
Yeah, great tip. Thanks, Don. All right, the next question is, how often are maths, diagrams, or flowcharts presented in academic writing task 1?
It's impossible to say because as soon as people can predict a task, then Cambridge will change that task because they don't want to be predictable and they want to have a variety. So sometimes you might find that there is a stretch of processes, or maybe then there might be a group of line grabs, but no one knows, and this is important. The people who deliver the test, the IDP centres, the British Council, they do not know what the test will contain before the test day. And this is an important part of the security and the integrity of the test.
Thanks, Don. Someone asked, in IELTS General Training Task 1, how many paragraphs should one write to get a band score of 8 and above?
There is no hard and fast rule, a very nice idiom, by the way. But I would say a minimum of 3 paragraphs, a maximum of 5 paragraphs in a task 1. Remember, you have 150 words. So you would need at least 3 paragraphs. But if you go beyond 5 paragraphs, well, probably 2 of those paragraphs could be combined effectively into 1 paragraph. So that's, as a rule of thumb, another very good idiom, Kavita.
Great. You're full of idioms today.
It is.
So next question. What tips do you have when one needs to brainstorm ideas for the main body of the writing task 1?
Yep. So you don't really have to brainstorm ideas for academic task 1 because all the ideas are there in front of you. You are simply describing the data, the trends, the information. You do need to brainstorm ideas for general training task 1 because you are simply given a situation and you have to be creative. Well, what were the problems? What was my experience? What is my advice to this person? In that case, I would recommend that you practice this thing. How would I approach this? And refer to your own experience. If it is, for example, complaining about public transport, think about your own experience. Have you had a bad experience on public transport? Or has a friend had a bad experience? Talk about that.
Great. Another person asked, if we are presented with bar charts, do we need to describe each bar separately?
No. You might find that there are 10 bars on a bar chart. If you are going to describe each one of those, then it would be a poor answer because you are not choosing the key features, you are choosing every feature. In the case of, if it's a bar chart that is talking about, say, 4 or 5 different categories, I would mention all of those categories, but you don't have to say something about all of them. You might, in fact, include a couple of them in the one statement. You could say column A and column B are very similar. So what really you need to do is to practice looking at a lot of graphs, a lot of charts, and working out for yourself what are the key features here. You're not asked to describe everything. You are asked to describe the main things.
Perfect. Someone else asked, what are uncommon words?
What are uncommon words? Flocculent is an uncommon word. But leaving that aside, you don't want to actually use words that are too uncommon, like that one that I just used then. You should do a lot of reading. In order to improve your English, improve your writing and your speaking and your listening, I suggest reading a lot and reading actively. So when you read, less is more. Reading one page carefully and making a few notes about new words and contexts of words and how words go together and what they mean, and doing a little bit of research, looking at your learner's dictionary, then that is useful. That is time that is really useful. And you will find some good words. They don't have to be extraordinary words, but you will find some good words. And if you know how to use them and in what context, then that is sufficient.
Great. We are racing through these questions, Don. Would you recommend, so the next question is, would you recommend that I include the overview in the intro? Or as some people have recommended, is it better to do it at the end of the essay instead?
I think that if you are very clear at the beginning as to what your overview will be, then it's not a problem to put it at the beginning. But very often I find that in the process of writing, that's when I really understand toward the end what the overview should be. And so if you're like me, I would put the overview at the end, because by the time I've done the description, then I will know what the overview looks like, and not before. Okay.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So I have another question about tenses. Someone asked, what is the best tense to use while writing?
It really depends on what you're writing about. There are two very good examples that we just saw. We were looking at the person who was talking about his experience in the library. And he should have said, I have used the library, I have seen, because he's talking about in the past right up to the present time. And that's the present perfect tense. But if you mention a time in the past, like in 2012, as in that first table of figures about the countries, if you're mentioning when in the past, that is always the simple past tense. Sometimes you can write a description perfectly well using the present tense. But again, look at lots of examples of people describing that sort of information. But as a rule of thumb, my idiom again, if you're talking about when something happened in the past, use the past tense. If you're talking about the past, but you don't say exactly when, that's the present perfect tense.
Cool.
And don't forget the future tense either.
Of course. So next question. First line indent is the most common way to signal the start of a new paragraph. So is this something I should do when starting a new paragraph?
That's what I do, and I would recommend it, as long as it's clear. If you indent the first line, or if you leave a space between paragraphs, both are equally effective, as long as it is clear.
Nice one. In the academic task 1, what's the best way to organize the paragraph if two different diagrams are presented, such as bar diagram and pie chart? I find it quite challenging and confusing, and the last time I got this question, I ran out of time. So any advice, Don?
Yep. If it's confusing, I would take the simplest path. And the simplest path would be to talk about one graph in one paragraph. First of all, start with an introductory paragraph. And then the second paragraph will be talking about the first graph. The third paragraph will be talking about the second paragraph. And then your conclusion, your final paragraph, will be making a few comparisons in terms of your overview. That's one way of doing it. If you feel more confident, you might write one paragraph comparing both graphs on a couple of criteria, and then another paragraph comparing both graphs on the other criteria, and then conclude with your overview.
Thanks, Don.
Again, there is no hard and fast rule. The challenge is to be logical and clear.
Exactly. All right, we're running out of time, so I'll ask this one last one. Speaking about informal and formal, we have a question from someone about an informal letter. So may I write, hope this letter finds you in good health and spirit?
Yes, that's a very lovely phrase, okay? And it's exactly what you would say to a friend. So for an informal letter, perfect. For an informal letter, no. Okay.
Thank you so much, Don. And our test takers are very grateful too. I see so many comments from them expressing their sincere thanks to you.
Well, I thank them for tuning in.
Yeah. And to all of you who joined us today, we truly appreciate your time. If we didn't get the chance to answer your question, make sure to message us directly and we will answer it. Meanwhile, we have something exciting to share with everyone. We've actually created a brand new IELTS Prepare Hub. It's a one-stop shop for all official IDP IELTS preparation materials. And in this new hub, you can access all the resources you need in one place. So from articles, videos, to online courses and practice tests, we have even published every webinar we have ever hosted there. So visit ielts.idp.com/prepare to view the hub and let us know what you think on social. So well, that wraps up our session this evening. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.
See ya.